Good morning or good evening, depending on where you are today. How is everyone doing? Today we are going to read through Chapter 9 of Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. If this is your first time joining us, we're not just going to read the words. We're going to talk about the vocabulary words or phrases that we find as we read through the chapter. So we'll be stopping to talk about interesting vocabulary words and phrases which maybe aren't clear, especially if English is not your first language. So if you are watching this live, then I really do want you to make comments and ask questions in the chat section, because that's what makes the reading this more interesting. You ask questions. You say, "What does this mean?" Or "I don't understand that phrase. Can you read that again?" That's what we're doing. So you're not interrupting. That's helping me. It makes the video more interesting. All right, well, let's get started with Chapter 9 of Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. Lenina felt herself entitled, after this day of queerness and horror, to a complete and absolute holiday. Remember, queer just means strange. Alexander Kuzmin says good morning. Good morning, Alex. How are you doing this morning? As soon as they got back to the rest house, she swallowed 6 half-gram tablets of soma. So remember, she had this. They went on this tour of the savage reservation, and she had a horrible day. She hated every minute of it, and she forgot to take her drugs, which is called soma. Everybody in this society takes a drug called soma so that they never feel uncomfortable or unhappy, but she forgot hers. So now she's taking an extra dose. Well, I think usually they just take 1 or 2 pills, so she's taking a very large dose of soma. So she swallowed 6 half-gram tablets of soma, lay down on her bed, and within 10 minutes had embarked for lunar eternity. So she went into outer space with her drugs. It would be 18 hours at least before she was in time again. Bernard, meanwhile, lay pensive. To be pensive means to be thinking. So pensive means thinking. So he's laying there, but he's not taking drugs. He's laying there thinking, because they had a very strange experience in this savage reservation, and they met people like them who, for whatever reason, got trapped there. And there's a woman. What was her name? I think Linda is her name. And she had a son. So that son was born there. He only knows that world. And Bernard is thinking, I want to take him back into society. So that's what he's thinking about. So Bernard, meanwhile, lay pensive, thinking about it. And wide-eyed in the dark. It was long after midnight before he fell asleep. Long after midnight, but his insomnia had not been fruitless. He had a plan. So insomnia means you can't sleep. And if something is fruitless, that means nothing is produced. You get nothing from it. And so this phrase, his insomnia, his sleeplessness had not been fruitless, means even though he couldn't sleep, it was productive. Something was produced from his insomnia, from his inability to sleep. Punctually on the following morning at 10 o'clock, the green-uniformed octoroon stepped out of his helicopter, and Bernard was waiting for him among the agaves. Miss Crown's gone on soma holiday. Miss Crown's gone on soma holiday, he explained. So that means she took so many drugs that she's just gone. She's laying in bed completely in outer space in another universe. Can hardly be back before 5, which leaves us 7 hours. He could fly to Santa Fe, do all the business he had to do, and be in Malpais again, long before she woke up. She'll be quite safe here by herself. Oh, that's a question. She'll be quite safe here by herself? Safe as helicopters, the octoroon assured him. They climbed into the machine and started off at once. At 10:34, they landed on the roof of the Santa Fe post office. At 20:37, Bernard had gotten through to the World Controller's office in Whitehall. At 10:39, he was speaking to his Ford ship's fourth personal secretary. At 10:44, he was repeating his story to the first secretary. At 10:47 and a half, it was the deep, resonant voice of Mustafa Mond himself that sounded in his ears. I ventured to think, stammered Bernard. To stammer is to stammer. Stammer. I ventured to... So he's nervous talking to Mustafa Mond, who's a very, very important person. We discover that in the first 2 chapters. I ventured to think, stammered Bernard, that your Ford ship might find the matter of sufficient scientific interest. Yes, I do find it of sufficient scientific interest, said the deep voice. Bring these 2 individuals back to London with you. Your Ford ship is aware that I shall need a special permit. The necessary orders, said Mustafa Mond, are being sent to the warden of the reservation at this moment. You will proceed at once to the warden's office. Good morning, Mr. Marks. There was silence. Bernard hung up the receiver and hurried up to the roof. Warden's office, he said to the gamma-green octoroon. At 10:54, Bernard was shaking hands with the warden. Delighted, Mr. Marks, delighted. His boom was deferential. We have just received special orders. I know, said Bernard, interrupting him. I was talking to his Ford ship on the phone a moment ago. His bored tone implied that he was in the habit of talking to his Ford ship every day of the week. So he's trying to sound very important, like, yeah, I know, I was just talking to him. This very important guy. If you'll kindly take all of the necessary steps as soon as possible, he emphatically repeated. He was thoroughly enjoying himself. At 11:03, he had all the necessary papers in his pocket. So long, he said patronizingly to the warden. You probably have seen this before because I think it's pretty common, but just in case you don't know, so long is a very informal, casual way of saying goodbye to someone. So long. Bye. He walked across to the hotel, had a bath, a vibrovac massage, and an electrolytic shave, listened into the morning's news, looked for half an hour on the televisor, ate a leisured luncheon, and at 2:30 flew back with the octoroon to Malpais. The young man stood outside the rest house. Bernard, he called. Bernard. There was no answer. Noiseless, on his deerskin moccasins, he ran up the steps and tried the door. The door was locked. They were gone. Gone? It was the most terrible thing that had ever happened to him. She asked him to come to see, and now they were gone. He sat down on the steps and cried. Half an hour later, it occurred to him to look through the window. The first thing he saw was a green suitcase with the initials LC painted on the lid. Joy flared up like fire within him. He picked up a stone and smashed the glass, tinkled on the floor. Tinkling is the sound of glass hitting each other. So you know that sound of maybe 2 glasses like this. Oh, I can make a tinkle right here. That's tinkling. That's a tinkling sound. It would be more of a tinkle if the glasses were empty. By the way, if you have to go pee, one way that you can say that is to have a tinkle because of the sound the pee makes when it hits the water. Maybe that's too information, but it's true. Okay, let's see. Oh, Fast Cars says, good morning. Good morning, Fast Cars. How are you doing today? Let's see. So the smashed glass tinkled on the floor. A moment later, he was inside the room. He opened the green suitcase, and all at once he was breathing Lenina's perfume, filling his lungs with her essential being. His heart beat wildly. For a moment he was almost faint, and then bending over the precious box, he touched, he lifted into the light, he examined. The zippers on Lenina's spare pair of viscose velveteen shorts were at first a puzzle, then solved, a delight. Zip, and then zip, zip, and then zip. He was enchanted. Her green slippers were the most beautiful things he had ever seen. He unfolded a pair of what is this? Zippy kamikniks. I don't think that's a real word, but let me see. Maybe it is a real thing. It sounds so ridiculous. Zippy kamikniks. What is a zippy kamikniks? One piece wear for... Oh, but it's not a real word. It's just a word made up for this book. But it describes women's underwear, a type of women's underwear. So he unfolded a pair of zippy kamikniks, blushed. Blushed means, your face turns red. All the blood comes to your face because you're embarrassed. And then you blush. So he's holding up her underwear, and then he got embarrassed. Blushed, put them hastily away again, but kissed a perfume acetate handkerchief, and wound a scarf round his neck. Remember, winding is when you do this. It's when you take something and you make a circular motion with it. We've talked about that word before. So if you have a scarf, a scarf is something you put around your neck. If you do this, you're winding the scarf around your neck. Opening a box, he split a cloud of scented powder. He spilt a cloud of scented powder. His hands were floury with the stuff. He wiped them on his chest, on his shoulders, on his bare arms. Delicious perfume. He shut his eyes. He rubbed his cheek against his own powdered arm. Touch of smooth skin against his face. Lenina, he whispered. Lenina. A noise made him start. Remember, start means... So he heard a noise and then... made him guiltily turn. He crammed up his thieveries into the suitcase and shut the lid. When you cram something, you try to fit a lot of things into a small space. Let's take a look. Let's see if we can find a picture of crammed. So cram means a lot of things go into a small space. So this car is crammed with suitcases and backpacks and bags. Let's see if we can get this picture over here. This place, I don't know what that is crammed with people, trying to fit a lot of things into one small space. This suitcase is crammed with clothes, trying to fit a lot of clothes into one small space. That's a useful word, crammed. Well, I think I'm going to write that down. I try to make little short videos explaining these words if they're extremely useful. I think that's a good one. Crammed. Okay, so a noise made him start. Made him guiltily turn. He crammed all of his thieveries. He was stealing things out of her suitcase, looking at her underwear. But then he heard a noise, and then he tried to cram them all back into the suitcase. Wellington Cardoso says, "Good morning. Good morning. How are you doing this morning?" He crammed up his thieveries into the suitcase and shut the lid, and then listened again and looked. Not a sign of life, not a sound. And yet he had certainly heard something. Something like a sigh. A sigh. Something like the creak of a board. He tiptoed to the door and, cautiously opening it, found himself looking onto a broad landing. On the opposite side of the landing was another door ajar. Ajar means open, or a little bit open. Let's see if we can find a picture of ajar. You might actually, in your car, you might have a little alarm, a little light in your car that says door ajar. Because, sometimes you close the door of your car, but you don't close it completely, which is bad. That's dangerous. So sometimes, I haven't had a car in a long time. Cars were very different when I owned a car. But, there used to be a little light that would say door ajar, meaning, the door is a little bit open. So that's what it means. It's usually applied to doors. I can't think of anything else that you would call ajar. My mouth was ajar. I guess you could say something like that if you wanted to, but it would be a little bit unusual. I wonder if it only means for doors. Let's see. Ajar, meaning. When I look up the definition of ajar, it actually says of a door or other opening, but it specifically mentions door. It's mostly used with the word door. But also, they give an example of window. The window was ajar. So the window is a little bit open. So I recommend just using that for windows and doors. Little bit open. So on the opposite side of the landing was an open door, ajar. So a little open. He stepped out, pushed, and peeped. Remember, peep is to take a little look. So there was a door ajar on the opposite side of the hall, and he went over and he took a little peep. He looked in the door that was ajar. Hadi says, "Good morning." Good morning, Hadi. How are you doing today? Hadi says, door ajar, door a little bit open, one can peek through it. That's right. So because the door is ajar, you can have a little peep. There on a low bed, the sheet flung back. Fling means to throw. And it's a very irregular verb. Fling, flang, flung. Fling is like throwing something. But when you fling something back, it's like you open it. So like if you here, I could fling open my sweater. Fling. So if you fling back a sheet, that means that you throw it back. There on a low bed, the sheet flung back, dressed in a pair of pink one-piece zippy pajamas, lay Lenina fast asleep, and so beautiful in the midst of her curls, so touchingly childish with her pink toes and her grave, sleeping face, so trustful in the helplessness of her limp hands and melted limbs, that the tears came to his eyes. With an infinity of quite unnecessary precautions, for nothing short of a pistol shot could have called Lenina back from her Soma holiday. Before the appointed time, he entered the room. He knelt on the floor beside the bed, and he gazed. He clasped his hands. His lips moved. Her eyes, he murmured. Her eyes, her hair, her cheek, her gait, her voice. Handless in thy discourse, oh, that her hand, in whose comparison all whites are ink, writing their own reproach, to whose soft seizure the signet's down is harsh. Okay, so remember that, this boy is an outcast because he's not like the other people in this reservation. And they don't like him, and they don't include him in anything, and they don't talk to him. So he grew up very lonely. But somebody found a book of Shakespeare and gave it to him as a present. And he loved reading that book, even though he didn't understand it. That was his only thing. He always used to just read Shakespeare. So now he's just quoting Shakespeare. What does all that mean? I don't know if it's really worth exploring. I don't know if I can explain it. Let's see. Her eyes, her hair. So her eyes, her hair, her cheek, her gait. The gait is the way that you position your body, especially when you're walking. That's a gait. So the way she walks. So that's her eyes, her hair, her cheek, the way she walks, her voice. Handless in thy discourse. I have no idea what handless could mean. Let's see. Handless. Now we're learning Elizabethan English. Let's see. Handless. What does handless mean? Handle. Oh, to handle, like to manage. English used to have, a lot of languages have an informal U, like in Spanish it's tú, and, that's the only one I know. Spanish or French is like two. But English used to have that, and that was thou and thy, which you can see here, thy. So that's like the to form, the familiar form of talking to someone. So, handlest in thy discourse. Oh, I don't know. I don't think it's worth trying to decipher this. It's hard to understand Shakespearean English. Let's just keep going. A fly buzzed round here. So, the sound of a fly is bzzz, and that's buzzing. So a fly buzzed round her. Bzzz. That's also the sound of electricity. That's also the way the electricity sounds. He waved it away. Flies, he remembered. Okay, more Shakespeare. On the white wonder of dear Juliet's hand may seize and steal immortal blessing from her lips, who even in pure and vestal modesty still blush as thinking their own kisses sin. Don't worry if you don't understand that. Actually, when you're reading Shakespeare in school, usually they have a translation into modern English because it could be pretty hard sometimes to understand what they're saying. But we're not going to go through that right now. Very slowly, with the hesitation, he's just quoting poetry and being very romantic and in love. Very slowly, with the hesitating gesture of one who reaches forward to stroke a shy and possibly rather dangerous bird, he put out his hand. It hung there, trembling. Within an inch of those limp fingers, it's kind of the opposite of tense. So if you're awake, your fingers maybe are contracting, the muscles are contracting and they look stiff. But limp would be like this, not. So she's completely relaxed. Therefore, her fingers are not like this while she's sleeping. They're like this. They're limp. They're relaxed. Within 1 inch of those limp fingers, on the verge of contact, did he dare to profane with his unworthiest hand that? No, he didn't. The bird was too dangerous. His hand dropped back. How beautiful she was. How beautiful. And then suddenly he found himself reflecting that he had only to take hold of the zipper at her neck and give one long, strong pull. He shut his eyes. He shook his head with the gesture of a dog shaking its ears as it emerges from the water. Detestable thought. He was ashamed of. So I think he's thinking about like opening up her clothes to look at her body. Detestable thought. He was ashamed of himself. Pure and vestal modesty. There was a humming sound in the air. Another fly trying to steal immortal blessings, a wasp. He looked and saw nothing. The humming grew louder and louder, localized itself as being outside the shuttered windows. The plane! In a panic, he scrambled to his feet and ran into the other room, vaulted through the open window, and hurrying, that means jumped. He jumped through the open window. And hurrying along the path between the tall agaves was in time to receive Bernard Marx as he climbed out of the helicopter. Okay, this was a short chapter because we're already at chapter 10. I think I'm going to continue reading because that was only like 25 minutes. But first, I'm going to take a little break. So I will be right back, and then we will read chapter 10 to see, because I want to see what happens when they take him away to the brave new world. Oh, let's see. Where do I want to put on my be right back screen, but it's disappeared. Okay, here it is. Okay, so I'll be back in 1 minute, and then we will continue with chapter 10. All right, thank you for waiting. Sorry about that. Let's put back our mysterious music. Okay. Well, Hadi says the door flung open. Yeah, but so what's the difference between saying opening the door and the door flinging open? Remember, fling means throw. So you could imagine that the door opens very quickly and very hard. The door flung open. So this is opening the door, and this is flinging the door open. All right, let's see. So this is chapter 10 of Brave New World. The hands of all the 4,000 electric clocks in all the Bloomsbury Center's 4,000 rooms marked 27 minutes past 2. This hive of industry, as the director was fond of calling it, a hive is the place where bees live. Let's take a look at a beehive. Of course, now that I told you that, you probably can imagine what a beehive is. Just in case, that's a beehive, the place where bees live. So you can say, you can call something a hive if it's the center of a lot of activity. You know, just imagine the hive with all the bees flying around it all the time. So a hive could be like the center of a lot of activity. Fast Cars says, flung is some kind of violent action. It could be. It doesn't have to be, though. It could just be like that. But it could also be. It depends. It depends on the situation. It depends on how you say it. It could be, though. It depends on the story. This hive of industry, so you can imagine a hive of industry is like the center of a lot of activity, a lot of business. As the director was fond of calling it, was in full buzz of work. So there are a lot of bee references here because bees buzz, bzzz, and it's a hive of industry. Everyone was busy, and then they've got this word busy. Everything in ordered motion, under the microscopes, their long tails furiously lashing. Spermatozoa were burrowing headfirst into eggs and fertilized. The eggs were expanding, dividing, and if Bokanovskified, budding and breaking up into whole populations of separate embryos. From the social predestination room, the escalators went rumbling down into the basement, and there in the crimson darkness, stewingly warm in their cushion of peritoneum engorged with blood surrogate and hormones, the fetuses grew and grew, or poisoned, languished into a stunted epsilonhood. That's really hard. That's some pretty complicated stuff. But he's just describing the process of fertilizing an egg. Let's just say that. With a faint hum and the rattle. Remember, this word rattle is like this sound. So with a faint hum and a rattle, the moving racks crawled imperceptibly through the weeks and recapitulated aeons to where, in the decanting room, the newly unbottled babes uttered their first yell of horror and amazement. The dynamos purred in the sub-basement. The lifts rushed up and down. On all the 11 floors of nurseries, it was feeding time. From 1,800 bottles, 1,800 carefully labeled infants were simultaneously sucking down their pint of pasteurized external secretion. Above them, in 10 successive layers of dormitory, the little boys and girls who were still young enough to need an afternoon of sleep were as busy as everyone else, though they did not know it, listening unconsciously to hypnopedic lessons in hygiene and sociability and class consciousness, and the toddlers loved life. Above these again were the playrooms, where the weather having turned to rain, 900 older children were amusing themselves with bricks and clay modeling, hunt the zipper, and erotic play. Hadi says, if someone storm into the room and then fling open the door, is the result eventually? Well, I think wouldn't you first fling open the door and then storm into the room? He flung open the door and stormed into the room. That means he walked very loud, with very heavy steps, in a very angry way. He walked in a very angry way. But I think you would first fling open the door and then storm into the room. Above these again were the playrooms, where the weather having turned to rain, 900 older children were amusing themselves with bricks and clay modeling, hunt the zipper, and erotic play. Buzz, buzz, the hive was humming. Busily, joyfully, blithe was the singing of the young girls. Oh, we better look up that word blithe. Let's see. Without thought or regard, carefree, heedless. So, carefree. Blithe was the singing of the young girls over their test tubes. The predestinators whistled as they worked in the decanting room, with glorious jokes were cracked above the empty bottles. But the director's face as he entered the fertilizing room with Henry Foster was grave, wooden, with severity. Hadi says, rattle your dag. Does that mean hurry up? I've never heard that before, rattle your dag. Let me see. Rattle your dag. Let's see what they say here. Rattle your dags means to hurry up. If you can imagine the dags on a sheep, what the dags on a sheep would do if they were running. I don't know where they use it. I have never ever heard that before. Rattle your dags. Oh, it says it's an Australian expression. So maybe they say that in Australia. I've never heard that before. Well, I wouldn't recommend using that outside of Australia. A public example, he was saying, in this room, because it contains more high caste workers than any other in the center. I have told him to meet me here at 2:30. He does his work very well. Put in Henry with hypocritical generosity. I know, but that's all the more reason for severity. His intellectual eminence carries with it the corresponding moral responsibilities. The greater a man's talents, the greater his power to lead astray. So to go astray means to go in the wrong way, to go in the wrong direction. So if somebody is going astray in society, it means they're not following the rules of society. They're going a different way, which that always means a bad way. So I think they're talking about Bernard, and they're saying that he's so smart, he has a responsibility to act right in society, and he doesn't. He doesn't follow the rules of society. He goes astray and thinks in a different way, and that's very irresponsible of him. The greater a man's talents, the greater his power to lead astray. Oh, not that he's going astray, but the greater the power that he could make other people go astray, to think the wrong way. It is better that one should suffer than that many should be corrupted. Consider the matter of dispassionately, Mr. Foster, and you will see that no offense is so heinous as unorthodoxy of behavior. Heinous, I know what it means, but I don't know how to explain it, so I'm just going to cheat and look it up. It means like shockingly horrible or something like that. Let's see. A person or wrongful act, especially a crime, utterly odious or wicked, like evil. Murder kills only the individual. And after all, what's an individual? With a sweeping gesture, this would be like a sweeping gesture, he indicated the rows of microscopes. So it looks like he's doing a tour or something, or at least he wants to show all of the microscopes. So they're in a large laboratory, I think like from the beginning of the book, with many microscopes in one long line. So he wants to show, look at all the microscopes. Sweeping gesture. He indicated the rows of microscopes, the test tubes, the incubators. We can make a new one with the greatest ease, as many as we like. Unorthodoxy threatens more than the life of mere individual. It strikes at society itself. Yes, at society itself, he repeated. Ah, but here he comes. Bernard had entered the room and was advancing between the rows of fertilizers towards them. A veneer of jaunty self-confidence thinly concealed his nervousness. Jaunty, well, to me, jaunty means like happy, but let's see, jaunty. Having or expressing lively, cheerful, self-confident manner. So Bernard is very proud of himself because this very important man, Mustafa Mond, liked his idea of bringing these two people back to society, but the other people don't like it at all. So he's walking into the laboratory. Yeah, I'm the coolest scientist in town. Okay, let's see. But he's also nervous because it says a veneer, like a coating of jaunty self-confidence. So when you look at him, you see that he's very happy and very proud of himself. But it hid that underneath you could see also he's a little bit nervous. The voice in which he said, "Good morning, director," was absurdly too loud. That in which, correcting his mistake, he said, "You asked me to come and speak to you here?" Ridiculously soft. A squeak. "Yes, Mr. Marks," said the director portentously. I think we've had that word portentously, but I don't remember what it means. Let's look it up again. In a way that sounds important, a warning of someone that is going to happen in the future, especially when it's something unpleasant. In a way, let's see. Maybe let's just do portentous. To do something pompously or overly solemn manner, so as to impress. So he's acting fake. So let's see. What did he say portentously? Let's see if we can try to say. You asked to come and speak to me here? Ridiculously soft, a squeak. Yes, Mr. Marks. So wait, he said that portentously, which means that he said it in a way that sounded very serious. Yes, Mr. Marks. So he was very serious, almost in a fake way. I did ask you to come here. You returned from your holiday last night, I understand. Yes, Bernard answered. Yes, repeated the director, lingering. Now the director, I think that this is the father of that boy that Bernard just took back. The director is not going to be happy with all of this. Yes, repeated the director, lingering a serpent on the S. Yes. Then suddenly, raising his voice, "Ladies and gentlemen," he trumpeted, "ladies and gentlemen," the singing of the girls over their test tubes, the preoccupied whistling of the microscopists, suddenly ceased, There was a profound silence. Everyone looked round. "Ladies and gentlemen," the director repeated once more, "excuse me for thus interrupting your labors. A painful duty constrains me. The security and stability of society are in danger. Yes, in danger, ladies and gentlemen. This man," he pointed accusingly at Bernard, "this man who stands before you here, this Alpha Plus, to whom so much has been given, and from whom, in consequence, so much must be expected, this colleague of yours, or should I anticipate and say this ex-colleague, has grossly betrayed the trust imposed in him." Uh-oh. "By his heretical views on sport and soma, by the scandalous unorthodoxy of his sex life, by his refusal to obey the teachings of our Ford, and behave out of office hours, even as a little infant." Here the director made the sign of the T. "He has proved himself an enemy of society, a subverter, ladies and gentlemen, of all order and stability, a conspirator against civilization itself. For this reason, I propose to dismiss him. To dismiss him with ignominy. Ignominy. We better look at that. I think we've looked this word up before, but ignominy. Deep personal humiliation and disgrace. I propose to dismiss him. Dismiss him with ignominy. So, dismiss him and embarrass him, make him feel shame and disgrace. From the post he has held in this center, I propose forthwith to apply for his transference to a sub-center of the lowest order, and that his punishment may serve the best interest of society, as far as possible removed from any important center of population. In Iceland, he will have small opportunity to lead others astray by his unfordly example. Well, I'm sorry, I like Iceland, and I don't think that would be a punishment. I would love to go to Iceland. The director paused, and then folding his arms, he turned impressively to Bernard. "Marx," he said, "can you show any reason why I should not now execute the judgment passed upon you?" "Yes, I can," Bernard answered in a very loud voice. Somewhat taken aback. When you're taken aback, that's when you go like this. So the director was not expecting that answer, and his reaction was, but still majestically. "Then show it," said the director. "Certainly. But it's in the passage. One moment." Bernard hurried to the door and threw it open. "Come in," he commanded, and the reason came in and showed itself. There was a gasp. That's a gasp. A murmur of astonishment and horror. A young girl screamed, standing on a chair to get a better view. Someone upset 2 test tubes full of spermatozoa. So that means someone knocked over 2 test tubes filled with sperm. Bloated, sagging, and among those firm, youthful bodies, those undistorted faces, a strange and terrifying monster of middle-agedness, Linda advanced into the room, coquettishly smiling. Coquettishly. We better look that up. Coquettish. I think that means like flirting. Let's see. Coquettish. Behaving in such a way as to suggest a playful sexual attraction. Flirtatious. So Linda walks into the room. Flirting is when you are trying to indicate to someone that you want to have physical relations with them. So she walked in. She's kind of big and fat and ugly, and she's very dirty. I don't know if she took a shower before this happened, or she's wearing clothes. I don't know. But she walked in, and she was walking in like, "Hey, everybody." Let's see. Coquettishly smiling, her broken and discolored smile, and rolling as she walked with what was meant to be a voluptuous undulation. So voluptuous, that's talking about curves and undulation, like move. So she's moving like that. She's very sexy. She's very fat and dirty, and she's missing teeth, but she's walking in very sexy. Hey, everyone. Her enormous haunches. Bernard walked beside her. "There he is," he said, pointing at the director. "Do you think I didn't recognize him?" Linda asked indignantly. So remember, the director went to this reservation a long time ago with his girlfriend, who was Linda at the time. She was in the important cast, the upper cast. But something happened. She disappeared. And the director abandoned her there. So she lived for, I don't know, maybe 20 years in this savage reservation. He abandoned her there. And so now Bernard is saying, there he is. And she says, do you think I don't know who he is? Linda asked indignantly. Then turning to the director, "Of course I knew you, Tomakin. I should have known you anywhere, among 1,000. But perhaps you've forgotten me. Do you remember? Don't you remember, Tomakin? You're Linda." She stood looking at him, her head on one side, still smiling, but with a smile that became progressively in face of the director's expression of petrified disgust. Less and less self-confident, that wavered and finally went out. "Don't you remember, Tomakin?" Her eyes were anxious, agonized. The blotched and sagging face twitched grotesquely. Grotesquely means in a disgusting way, in a way that makes you feel sick. Into a grimace of extreme grief. A grimace is like a feeling of an expression of pain or uncomfortableness on your face. It's a grimace, I think. I don't know if I can do a grimace. Let's see. Tomakin! She held out her arms. Someone began to titter. "What's the meaning," began the director, "of this monstrous Tomakin?" She ran forward, her blanket. So she's still not wearing clothes. She's wearing a blanket. Trailing behind her. I guess her blanket fell off. Threw her arms around his neck and hid her face in his chest. A howl of laughter went up irrepressibly. So people weren't even trying to hide. Because if you repress something, that means you try to hide it or you try to hold it in. So if there was a howl of irrepressible laughter, it means people couldn't hide it. They just started laughing and they didn't care. This monstrous practical joke, the director shouted, red in the face. He tried to disengage himself from her embrace. Desperately she clung. "But I'm Linda! I'm Linda!" The laughter drowned her voice. "You made me have a baby," she screamed above the uproar. And there was a sudden and appalling hush, because that's disgusting to them if a human has a baby, a human woman has a baby from her body. All babies are born in bottles now, in a laboratory. And they find it absolutely disgusting that a woman would physically have a baby. So they're shocked. "You made me have a baby," and everyone says, "Oh!" There was a sudden and appalling hush. Hush means quiet. Eyes floated uncomfortably, not knowing where to look. The doctor went suddenly pale, stopped struggling, and stood, his hands on her wrists, staring down at her, horrified. Yes, a baby. And I was its mother. She flung the obscenity like a challenge into the outraged silence. So here, look, they're using fling to mean words. She threw the words. She threw the words. She flung, let's see. Now, obscenity, if you say an obscenity, that means you're saying a bad word. So you know what the bad words are, the swear words, the curse words. But baby, having a baby to them, that's an obscene thing to say. That's disgusting. That's extremely offensive to them, as if you said a horrible word. So she flung the obscenity. She threw it at him. Yes, a baby. I was its mother. That's another disgusting word to them, mother. She flung the obscenity. I was its mother. Into the outraged silence, and then suddenly breaking away from him, ashamed, covered his face with her hands. Oh, covered her face. She was ashamed. She was ashamed that she had the baby. Covered her face with her hands, sobbing. Sobbing is very strong crying. It wasn't my fault, Tommykin, because I always did my drill, didn't I? Didn't I? Always. I don't know how, if you know how awful, Tommykin, but he was a comfort to me. All the same, turning towards the door. John, she called. John. He came in at once, paused for a moment just inside the door, looked round, then soft on his moccasined feet, strode. To stride is to walk. But it's kind of a nice walk, actually, so he strode in. And strode quickly across the room, fell on his knees in front of the director and said in a clear voice, My father. The word for father was not so much obscene as it was with its connotation of something at one remove. Oh gosh, I have to read that again. Let me try that again. The word for father was not so much obscene with its connotation of something at one remove from the loneliness, the loathsomeness, and moral obliquity of childhood, merely gross, eschatological rather than a pornographic impropriety. Oh, that is weird. That is a weird phrase. Let's see. For father was not so much obscene as... Okay, now we have this clause. With its connotation of something at one remove... With its connotation of something at one, remove from the loathsomeness and moral obliquity of childhood. With its connotation of something at one remove... it doesn't make any sense to me. With its connotation of something at one remove from... Loathsome means something you hate. Remove from the loathsomeness and moral obliquity of childbearing. Merely gross. Let's just say, because I'm not going to try to take that apart. That's just a weird phrase. But they're saying it wasn't obscene. Mother was like an obscene, disgusting word. Father, and I think what they're saying here, though, is father wasn't so much an obscene word as it was just disgusting. Gross means is disgusting. Gross is another word for disgusting. Oh, that's gross. Scatological, that means it has something to do with poop. So if something is scatological, it has it's on the same level as poop, rather than a pornographic impropriety. The comically smutty word, smutty means also like pornographic. So smut is pornographic. Why are you looking at that pornography? Why are you looking at that smut? Smut means something disgusting, but it always means something about sex. So the comically smutty word. So that's father is not so much it's not so much a bad word as it is kind of like a disgusting pornographic word. But it's so disgusting that people laugh when you say it. Relieved what had become quite intolerable tension. So people started laughing when he said, "You're my father," because it was so, maybe they were embarrassed. It's such a disgusting word that that people were embarrassed and they started laughing. Enormous, almost hysterical, peal after peal, as though it would never stop. "My father!" And it was the director. "My father! Oh, Ford! Oh, Ford!" That was really too good. The whooping and roaring renewed themselves. Faces seemed on the point of disintegration. Tears were streaming. 6 more test tubes of spermatozoa were upset. "My father!" Pale, wild-eyed, the director glared about him in an agony of bewildered humiliation. "My father!" The laughter, which had shown signs of dying away, broke out again more loudly than ever. He put his hands over his ears and rushed out of the room. Okay. Well, that was the end of chapter 10. These chapters are becoming shorter, but I think that we will stop here. So we're stopping. This is a very interesting place to stop. I would like to know what happens in chapter 11. But I will, about the same time tomorrow, I will be reading chapter 11 and maybe 12 if the chapters are short again. So we'll stop here for today. And thank you everyone who stayed and watched, and thank you for all of your questions and comments, and I hope that you come back tomorrow when we read chapter 11. Have a good day or a good night, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.